so this is what happened. And the person that was supposed to do that is Felix Sommerfeld. So Sommerfeld created an organization in El Paso. Remember, he was in the Hotel Orndorff. Yeah? They hired hundreds of agents. Hundreds of agents. They went to every hardware store. They went to every bar. They could figure out in which house somebody was conspiring. Anybody that smuggled, they had agents on the international bridge in El Paso searching people that came across the bridge. And we're talking Mexican agents searching Americans going from El Paso to Ciudad Juarez on American soil. Pretty impressive. That hasn't happened ever since. Sommerfeld figured out after a few days that not only were the men smuggling munitions, and the railroad workers were the worst ones because the railroad was going back and forth across the border, right? So if you worked at the railroads, it was easy to put some boxes of munitions somewhere in the railroad. But the other thing was that women were smuggling munitions. They were hiding munitions under their skirts. And so, of course, the male agents hired by Sommerfeld didn't dare to search the women. So Sommerfeld hired a bunch of women to search the women. And the El Paso Herald went crazy. All of El Paso went crazy that now there was a physical search of women on the international bridge between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. So the situation here at the border, including all the way up to El Paso, up to San Antonio, was that the crisis in El Paso had taken on such proportions that thousands and thousands of refugees came. Especially Mormons from Casas Grandes and other places were displaced. Of course, any landholder. There was basically no policing in Chihuahua. So they came across the border. There were 10 cities. It was a mess. And one person that I found that you might have heard of before is Emil Holmdahl. Anybody heard of Emil Holmdahl before? He's a soldier of fortune. He worked for Felix Sommerfeld, was one of his agents. But he also is credited with having stolen Pancho Villa's head. Yesterday we were looking for Santa Anna's leg. We know where Oregon's arm is, but Pancho Villa's head is still today nowhere to be found. The theory is that Emil Holmdahl stole it and sold it to the grandfather of George Bush, who gave it to the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University. That's where it is supposed to be. So I'm trying to find a secret agent who will go to the Skull and Bones and figure this out. But anyway, so Holmdahl was also working for Sommerfeld, and he was, this is a letter that I found where he corresponds directly with Sherwood Hopkins, and so he was actively fighting. He was a artilleryman and machine gunner, and so he was actively fighting, and he said we blew the socks off the red flaggers. They called them the red flaggers, los colorados. So the fight went on. It took until June when finally, here you see a search. Yeah, this is a picture also from that time period where they're searching a little parish for munitions. You see here Border Patrol in Nogales. The Sommerfeld organization ranged all the way along the border, so all the main border points. What happened is when they found people, when they found conspirators, they indicted them. So they were indicted, then they had to put down the judge. Texas was not so good in sentencing, but they would have a bail, right? So it's a bail of $1,000, which in today's money would be $21,000, so it's quite a lot of money. That kept most of the revolutionaries in jail. And the Mexican government had 40 days time to come up with an indictment from Mexico. Often this didn't happen. But Sommerfeld bribed the American Justice Department officials and the courts not to let these guys out. And so throughout the revolution, all the way until 1918, 800 Mexicans were still in jail, first at Fort Bliss, and then they were later transferred to California when a judge threatened to let them out. Sommerfeld and the Mexican government made damn sure that these people wouldn't fight again in the revolution. How close this cooperation was between the two countries, I would like to quote something from the historians Harris and Sadler. They wrote that the relationship between the Mexican Secret Service and American authorities had grown so close that it caused Harris and Sadler to observe the operations of these two organizations became virtually indistinguishable. And here are some of the examples of how they did that. I pieced together 98,000 documents from the FBI files, which are really mangled, and so I copied every one of them and sorted them and so forth, and that's how I could actually outline the story. March 11, Sommerfeld informed me that today that Nunez and Son, who run a grocery store on South Stanton Street in El Paso, are making dynamite bombs at the store. March 17, George Harold of the detective said there would be a rebel meeting on South Broadway tonight and that he could get a man into it. Same report. I saw Sommerfeld and he informed me that the rebels were going to ship arms and ammunition into Mexico consigned to a merchant of Chihuahua. He promised to furnish me the name of the merchant. March 18, I saw Lee Hall. Lee Hall was a former policeman that Sommerfeld hired. And he informed me that he had gone to work for Sommerfeld. He told me that he had informed that Thomas Duran left Douglas last night for El Paso to smuggle guns into Mexico. He also stated that Fernando Escobosa is smuggling guns at Douglas and Stark Station and is also recruiting men in this vicinity. March 18, Mr. Cramp of the Teal Detective Agency, which was an agency that the Mexican government hired and worked for Sommerfeld, showed me a telegram that he had received from Douglas stating that Francisca Villarreal, a child and a man on crutches, would arrive on the afternoon train in El Paso and that they carried very important revolutionary documents for delivery in El Paso. He also showed a telegram to Alberto Madero. The Secret Service men were at the station and brought the state rangers with them. You see, the Mexican government, Texas Rangers, local detectives, police people, all kinds of people helped. Here's another one, April 25. At 9 p.m. in company with Mr. Lee Hall, who now works for the Mexican government, I went down on the riverfront to investigate conditions. May 7, agent, then with the assistance of T.B. Cunningham. Cunningham is a very interesting guy because he claimed that the Standard Oil Company financed the Mexican Revolution. It's turned out it was not true, but he was one of those big talkers around the border. And Lee Hall of the Madero Secret Service made a thorough investigation throughout Kirtleville and Douglas, but failed to hear or locate any of the foresaid men who had supposed to have crossed the Mexican side. Sommerfeld himself at one point joined the hunt for smugglers. May 16, in the evening, some of the Mexican government men reported to me that they had located Manuel Garza Adalbe. Sommerfeld and I got a machine and chased out there, but it turned out that they had not crossed the border. A machine was a car, right? So they drove across. So what happened then is basically in June, Orozco was defeated. Of course, it was not only the efforts of Sommerfeld. The Mexican government sent General Huerta to the border, to Chihuahua, and Huerta actually militarily defeated Orozco. The last battle was in Ojinaga, across from Presidio. Orozco was injured in that battle, and but made it to the United States. Sommerfeld hunted him mercilessly, after the death of Madero, Sommerfeld worked for Pancho Villa, also still in charge of munitions and so forth. And Orozco was finally caught or killed in 1915, the summer of 1915, by a posse on Culbertson Ranch. I just drove through that area in the Big Bend, and so it was said to be that they were looking for cattle thieves or something like that, but the truth was that they particularly targeted Orozco and killed him on the American side. And so this is an important lesson to be learned about the Mexican Revolution. There was close cooperation between the Mexican and the American government when it suited both. And it was in the interest of the American government to quell the Orozco Rebellion. And this is the closest the US ever worked with Mexico in terms of securing the border. It is also the only time that a foreign secret service had operations on the US side of the border in such a mass. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of agents, foreign agents on the US side, under the eyes of US law, and with their approval. This episode, of course, is also one of the reasons why the Madero government eventually failed. Huerta became very powerful, and Madero was seen as very weak. And so because of these rebellions and the fact that Madero had to use the old federal forces to get a hold of Chihuahua, it weakened his position. And of course it was Huerta, not even a year later, who deposed Francisco Madero and killed him, or had him killed. The last picture I want to show you here is right down here. Here again is Felix Sommerfeld. After Madero was killed, Sommerfeld actually joined the Carrancistas briefly, but did not like Venustiano Carranza. He thought he was pig-headed, stubborn, wouldn't listen to him, and so at Christmas 1913, Sommerfeld joined Pancho Villa together with Felipe Angeles, who, by the way, also had a German wife. We heard that earlier today. There were lots of German wives, I guess. And he became the chief weapons buyer for Pancho Villa, and he also became Pancho Villa's ambassador in the United States. And so in the end, he is responsible in World War I for coaxing Pancho Villa into attacking Columbus, New Mexico. So thank you very much. Outside are books. If you want to buy any of the books, I have 4 books. One is in Spanish, published by Planeta, and Ricardo and Maria, and we all went to Mexico this summer and had a great time doing a book tour. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, please let me know.
What do you think about the Zimmerman telegram or letter or email or whatever?
Yeah. So the Zimmerman telegram basically was published in February 1917, and in this telegram the German government proposed to Venustiano Carranza, if you join us in the fight against the United States, we will help you get back California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and Texas. And of course the telegram was intercepted by the British government. The British government gave it to the American government, and it was a big outrage, big scandal, and it was that in combination with the starting of submarine warfare, unrestricted submarine warfare, was the reason the United States entered into the war against Germany. The background is much more complicated than this. Very interestingly, Zimmerman was asked, so the American government at first thought maybe this is a falsification, maybe the British were just trying to get America into the war. And so they asked Zimmerman for, did you write this telegram? And what did he say? Of course! He immediately admitted. The reason was the German government at that point had decided to go to war with the United States. If you look at the way the war is described in history books, we have the so-called neutrality period, so where the United States was neutral in World War I between 1914 and 1917. Of course, that's not the case. The United States was the biggest supplier of arms and ammunition to the British and French, and therefore they were active participants in the war from the perspective of Germany. So what Germany tried to do is they tried to create a war between Mexico and the United States. And this war was supposed to prevent the United States Army from actively joining the European front. And Sommerfeld was in charge of this strategy. And so the attack of Pancho Villa on Columbus in 1916 was one of the missions that Sommerfeld was supporting. And so the real German strategy to involve Mexico into a war, which actually, by the way, was quite successful. In the summer of 1916, the entire US Army, the entire US reserves were either in Mexico or at the Mexican border. If you think about that, the entire army. And Sommerfeld had proposed to the German government, look, once that happens, you start the submarine war, and then you will probably defeat Britain before the Americans can even come to Europe. And the German government could not agree. They had infighting, political problems. And so when they had finally decided to start the submarine warfare, the American forces were well armed. They had, for the first time, they had actual experience in battle. And of course, they went to Europe and defeated Germany. So the strategy totally backfired. But the Zimmermann telegram is really the last little bit of this strategy. At that point, the Germans didn't care that anybody read it. I think the Germans had already decided to have this war. But much more important is the time between January and July 1916, when the Germans actually created havoc in the United States and on the border. Does that explain your question? Yes?
When Huerta became a dictator, he has a problem to get ammunition and weapons.
Yes.
And Germany sent a ship to Mexico, and that was the casus belli. President Wilson sent the United States Army to Veracruz,
Sí.
and the army, the Mexican army from Huerta, they left the city, and the people of Veracruz and the cadets of the